What's up? What's up? What's up? How is everybody doing today? My friend Dale is here today. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, man. How's it going?
Good, good. Welcome, everybody, to the Flipside Streamcast. Not live this week, but that's okay. We are getting a good book review that we wanted to get out for this month, for the month of August. Dale's suggestion, I hadn't actually read it until... So when we kind of put it on the list, it was one that I was really looking forward to. So it's pretty exciting to be able to kind of take it on. And it is absolutely fitting into what I am doing right now in my life, in my other jobs. And so that's perfect. It was perfect to kind of look at. Excuse me. And that's the 4 disciplines of execution. If you don't know what it looks just like this with a big X on it. It's by Chris McChesney, Sean Covey, and Jim Hurling, and a couple others, Miss Bev Walker and Scott Thiel. And it's really achieving your wildly important goals. And Dale, I know for you, this is a big one that you use within your high performance. It's definitely something that you've integrated into it. And I want to let you lead kind of on it, because I know this is important for you. This is one you said this is a game changer. This is one of my top
yeah,
trends.
It's an area I think that's like, as far as business owners, especially need to understand, and it's there. I'll say, like, it talks about the 4 disciplines of execution, but there's some diversity here, and there's some big nuggets around, whether it's scorecarding and how to prioritize and focus, and so as a reference of really, I'll say, focusing your organization and identifying the most important things as relates to your strategy and getting your team aligned behind it. This is a really good book, not only in understanding it, but it brings a lot of resources to bear on how to implement this stuff too.
Right.
Notables, the Sean Covey on this is, I believe, the son of Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't read that, go read it. Awesome book to kind of bring you to earth. I mean, those are even the 7 habits that promote it for a half a second is an area that even in the youth coaching, and I know we've not done our episode yet on leadership and youth coaching, but like that book, just fundamentally, I try to teach people like the principles out of that often as well. And what's out of this book, I feel, when it comes to business, especially operations, especially, I feel much the same. I think these 4 disciplines are, again, I would say, very impactful game changers with regard to how your organization operates. So, I mean, you're into it, fresh to you. I read this, looking at my notes here, I read this back in 2020. What are your kind of thoughts on it as you kind of go through it and what you're finding?
I'm always someone who, first of all, you mentioned one of the first things that stood out to me overall book wise. I love the fact that you do get the kind of foundational stuff, and then you get the implementation and how you can kind of use it towards your business if you want to. That was very important. I also loved how it fits in today's world perfectly, right? So we're going to get into them, but I think we are expecting to do, all businesses are expecting their people to do more with less, right? And so what you have to focus on then is how people execute, and if they're executing effectively, right? We talk about clarity and focus all the time on Lion's Guide, and this really, it takes that, I don't want to say a step further, but it takes it and says, look, make sure you're going out, whether that's you and I would know it as commander's intent. Just, you got to have those things. And it really gives some strategies that are, I think, easy to implement too. Like if you just took them, I like my everyday leadership because I think it's instantly like, okay, it's simplified on my level. And I think these end up being the same way, right? They're not too, sometimes you can get very scientific leadership books and scientific kind of high performance books that go into like the psychology and stuff. And those are good, all well. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. I like, though, how this was kind of like a down to earth of like, just think about this. Like we live crazy lives. Let's just think about how we focus on something, or think about how because it's going to lead to better execution, or it's going to, whatever we end up doing. So overall, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really powerful book. This got turned on to me by a former employee when I was leading Corsica, and man, I just fell in love with it. I mean, it was hard to put down. Like I say, I've got pages of notes from it, and my notes for those you guys know how I read books. Like I sit there and I read with a highlighter, and I highlight, and then I come back and I kind of type up all those notes. And I know there's more technological, better ways to do that with Kindle and all that, but that's not me. But that's what I do. And this one is. I've just got pages for days from this group, from this book. You do as well. I mean, so I mean, let's jump into the 4 disciplines. Well, even before that, I think one of the things that points out in the beginning that I wanted to give a nod to is, it's natural for a leader to assume the people are the problem, and this was a big highlight for me because. I agree. I think if there's problems, you've always got to start looking at the system. And I feel your team are a part of that system. You've heard me say multiple times, like I feel a business is a work of art, and that's everything included. So how you put together your masterpiece includes the people that you're selecting, your processes, your systems, your strategies, all those things are on the canvas. And I think a lot of times leaders, when things aren't going the way they want it to or expect it to or whatever, default to people. It's been my experience that the people are as good as the processes. And because most people want to show up, they want to do a good job, or else you wouldn't have hired them in the first place. But, I just love that it calls that out. It basically says, as a leader, you own responsibility for the system, which is usually the starting point to evaluate the problems. And I agree.
Yeah, I when it breaks it down, and I've in full agreement with you, right? We focus on the people, but when we look at when we've talked about this many times, right? You have to sometimes make business decisions that are about that, and that's incorporating the system. You're incorporating the people, and you're incorporating kind of the services of everything that you do, and executing on that, whether it's executing HR, whether it's executing your basic fundamental of why you're there, whether it's executing on customer service, it's all has to be kind of exacting when you look at it and say, okay, because then in my eyes anyways, and this talks about it in the book, we'll get into this, but you can go back then and go, what broke down? Was it a person? Was it a system? Was it was it a computer glitch? Whatever. You can break it down and go, okay, we now know that it wasn't any of these other things, and we're still good with those as we build those avenues and those veins within our body of our company, and then go back and fix the problem, right? I mean, because it's easy when you can do that.
Well, in this, I'll give a nod to my Lions Guide Self-Discipline course. This is one of the things I talk about, what you mentioned here, the importance of building a system is because you can't really make measurable changes or hypothesize on changes to make unless you have a system to change against, right? Yeah. If you don't have, let's just keep it simple, steps 1 through 10 identified and executed consistently so that you can look at the results of that system and then start to make changes for a new desired result. Say it's producing better than you expected or not as good as you expected or whatever. And then you want to go to those steps 1 to 10 and start deciding what knobs, like think knobs that you're turning on a machine. When I turn this knob, I should expect X to happen. If you don't have a identified and consistently executed on system, trying to make changes effective changes, let's say, it is almost impossible, because what are you changing if you don't have a system identified? And I think the other thing that leaders make a big mistake on and take some discipline is you can't change 6 things at a time, right? Because that's
change fatigue, right? We had Laura Colbert come on. Laura comes on and talks about change fatigue, and you got to systematic. And this whole thing, right, is about executing each one of whether you're executing your business, whether you're executing change, because that you bring up a great point, right? Of where, if you're going to change, you need to know what you're changing from and what you're changing to, right? So there's got to be an endpoint, and we're going to talk about those things like lead and lag here, but you got to know where you're going, right? Because if you don't, I had a good business friend of mine, and wanted to kind of start his business like places he had been before. And now he's like, I want to take this on. All the right intentions, right? And thought, hey, I could just jump into this, whatever. And then conveniently forgot that the places he was at had multiple systems that he didn't see because he wasn't at those levels. And now all of a sudden he's trying to be like that other places he's been, which is fine. It's kind of like trying to be a Google. Google doesn't just happen that they have sleeping pods and that they get free food. Like that doesn't just, it doesn't, it's that they start from something and finally build into their systems of what they want, but they all have a starting point. Like you have to have your building blocks and then say, okay, I know I want to go and make sure that we get a ping pong table in the break room. Great. But make sure that everybody knows that it's not right. You know, like, why are you putting the ping pong table there? Yeah. What are we executing on? What's the function? Like, there's a lot of that. And I think building that start kind of pay, and listen, not everybody likes that. That's the other thing, right? You think like, well, nobody's going to like to have all these rules. Well, the truth is that we love rules. Like it's okay to have those things, because then you can move on from them and say, okay, now we know the basis, and now we can, if we all feel comfortable on moving towards someplace else, we can. So, well,
imagine, look, you and I both have young kids, right? Yep. And you see something with the youngsters, I'm talking elementary age kids, and because you use the word rules, right? So imagine we're playing a game, but we change the rules every time it doesn't go right? Like it didn't go my way. It's my house. It's my ball. We're changing that rule. Right. Like, and now people get frustrated, don't want to play because now the rules are changing so often. They don't know what it takes to win. So it is really important. And again, this is back to, it's a form of clarity, right? Like
absolutely.
People kind of, and I think it's a form of avoidance tactic. Like they talk down processes and, oh, it's too much work. And look, man, it's important stuff, because when everyone knows the rules that we're playing by, everyone can then just go play, right? It takes a multiplier of thinking out of the execution. You don't need to think every step, right? It's defined and you go execute. And I think the other thing I just want to say to the leaders out there, something else that I see is, and this is going to go from clarity to courage, which is be willing to make mistakes, right? You were saying earlier, you got to start somewheres. Start somewheres. And that's the point. Like if you start with a defined system, even though it's your first draft, first time, like you're defining a system based on a hypothesis of result. If I do these things, this is what I expect to happen. You do those things, what happened? And now you review, reflect, and adjust again. But this is word I learned watching this type of problem, which is being pedantic, where you just try to check every single box of everything before you do anything, right? You just completely think it to death. And guess what? You're losing nothing but time and really probably good experience, right? Like of just starting with something and then finding out if those problems exist or whatever. So don't be afraid to start with something, start with something and then give yourself some grace to say, hey, okay, first time through it didn't work. Let's let this, don't just immediately start reacting and changing it like the kid, changes the rules every time the ball doesn't go his way. Let it go in. And we'll talk about this here where it says, like you said, you want to go from X to Y in a certain time frame.
Correct.
Right? And so give it that time frame, right? Like this afternoon probably isn't a good time frame for a good process.
Right.
So,
by Z. Right.
Unless you completely miss something and the roof is on fire now, sure, pump the brakes and fix it. But give it some grace, get some in, be willing
because
to make
you need to let it when you don't have a system in place. And you know what? I'll be honest, to all the leaders out there, I'll be honest that I've learned about this not only through the book, but just through trial and error. Having been in the civilian sector now since mid 18 and being at different small businesses, you find out that everybody grows at different speeds, and that's okay. Later on in the show, I'm going to quote a great quote by George Carlin that I think is completely relevant here. But I think we get focused on And business leaders gets focused on, we have to have it this certain way because here's the template, right? My MBA said, here's the template, or I've watched other people do it and here's the template. You need to realize that the people that you have and you yourself, you're going to change as a business owner, as a leader, as you move forward. And I go back and I quote Powell, like giving the right leadership lesson to the person at the right time, that you owe that to yourself too, right? You can't just, if you guys are working on stuff, it's okay to start. And I'm going to kind of almost go outside of this book, but say, look, it's okay to just go, let's just see what we got. Like, we're not going to put anything, no expectations in it. To your point, don't be afraid to fail, right? Just no expectations. And then from there, we can go, now we know, because you're always learning, right? Like business ownership is always about learning. Like if you're not, I guarantee you are learning something all the time about your business, right, wrong, or what other, right? Either you're getting hard facts drilled into you saying, yep, every single time we do it, it's the exact same way. We know that. Or there's a lot of times where people are going, holy crap, the landscape of what we're doing is changing at such a rapid pace. How do we keep up? Well, maybe it's your processes need to be as fluid as the environment you're in, right? Which is not necessarily the norm. So then you have to look at the bigger picture of saying, okay, what's our overall process versus all of our smallers? All of our smallers may be changing like this, but our overall together, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I guess this leads right into the first discipline, right? Which is, and they reference it, not only is it on the cover, I think it can be used in 100 different areas. It's clarity. It's about focus, and that's focus on what's wildly important. And I love that they say wildly important. I think that's great. To me, that's a lot about brilliant on the basics. That's how I kind of say it. Mm-hmm. But I think it really takes into account, and one of the things they really mentioned, which is important to me to get a grasp on this, is that our modern society is obsessed with the idea of multitasking. And I think as leadership, we say that all the time. You got to be able to multitask. You got to be able to multitask. We were in aviation, and I would tell you that we had 1,000 different things to do, and it made sure that we had a checklist for some of those. And some of them we had to commit to memory. Some of them we could open up, right? Cookbook style, whatever it was going to be. And I think, but when you're focusing on what's wildly important and really saying, okay, what do we really need to make sure we're doing here? Whether that's a business decision, whether it's an HR decision, what's the kind of meat and potatoes of this whole thing? What's the most wildly important? There may be 6 or 7 things surrounding it that are going to be affected by this one decision or this one thing that you have to do, but that's okay. Focus on what's there. Use your core is the way I looked at it, because we expect people to multitask. So if we can get a person, a team, an entire company to say, okay, here's what's important so everybody knows. The rest of it, if that's in their mind, it's kind of like commander's intent, right? This is what's important to me. Okay, now you carry out whatever you guys got to do, knowing what that part is.
Yeah, and the book goes for, so yeah, discipline 1, focus on wildly important. Mm-hmm. It talks about, it also talks about the needs of the business. It refers to it as the whirlwind, right? Yep. Like the business is going to be operating and it's going to be a whirlwind. And what we're saying here, though, is you're identifying 1 to 2 wildly important things that even though the whirlwind's spinning, we all agree in this period, we're going to get this 1 to 2 thing done because they are the most impactful items. They're the needle movers. They're the one that they are the things that are taking you in the direction of progress, right? To make things better. Because, you see this, right? You see, you have an initiative over in a quarter or something like that, and you have a meeting about how important it is. And then inevitably I've seen like someone comes back and you hear about these other problems with the whirlwind, like stuff. Well, yeah, I wasn't doing that because I was hyper focused on our number one thing, like since last week, remember? It's like, yeah, but that's in addition to the work, right? Like we've got to manage the whirlwind. We've got to operate still, but we're going to operate in a way that we can work on this. And that's why you only do 1 or 2 of these, because they are usually heavy lifts. And I think I did want to mention that I call these things like, I call them MI2s or needle movers. These are the things that are going to be the most impactful items, or they're going to actually move the needle for, efficiency or whatever.
Yeah. One of the ways I like to use it in kind of how I look at it is, I had someone once tell me, this is a long time ago, and I have taken this on ever since, but as a business owner, as a leader, doesn't matter whoever you are, you're juggling, you're a juggler, right? You're juggling balls is what you're doing, right? And some of your balls are glass and some of your balls are rubber. And you got to know which ones are which, number one. And you got to know which ones I can drop and they're going to bounce back up to, and which ones are glass. And if you drop those, you got big problems. And I think just simplifying it to that effect of saying, look, you just got to know, which ones, because some of them are, you can take prioritization in there. You can pick compartmentalization. You can take, making sure you have trying to find clarity, trying to find your focus, all those same things. But let's simplify it and just say, hey, you're a juggler. Just know which ones you can't and when. And by the way, and I think this is really simple too, sometimes that glass ball is going to turn to a rubber ball, right? If you stay and that rubber ball may turn to a glass ball at sometimes. It just happens like that. And so you got to know when, recognize what you're juggling and recognize what you can go or not let go. And that I think is focus on what's wildly important, and if we ever start doing our live shows. It's a show because we're going to juggle, but if we're going to do our live lectures and you come out, I'm going to hand you, I'm going to ask somebody who can juggle in the audience, and I'm going to give you those glass balls and rubber balls, and I'm going to, you tell me which ones you want to drop and you don't want to drop, because when you do it, you'll really see. So yeah, I love that one. I think it's, like I said, it's one of the things, and I know for you personally, and I can tell everybody, Dale is always focusing myself and focusing the people he works with. What are we focusing on, whether it's this meeting, because you can simplify it to that, right? What are we focusing on this meeting? What are we focusing on this, this Streamcast? What are we focusing on in our business as a whole, if we're looking at funnels or whatever we're doing, right? And so I think that's super, that is, the book nails it for that, right? If you're going to execute to a high level, you got to make sure that you're focused on what's wildly important. So that's good.
A couple good highlights I had just in this area, one with which he said, there will always be more good ideas than there is the capacity to execute.
Yep, absolutely.
100%, man. And here's the thing. Just create yourself in your Google Drive or your Evernote or your OneNote or whatever, a list, and call it idea trap. Right. And as ideas come, just throw them in the trap, man. Like they don't, because, it's the dog chasing squirrels, right? Like your ideas are going to come, but you can't, they're probably good, but you can't go, it goes back to change fatigue or change whiplash. Like you just can't be that leader who's running in the door every day with this new epiphany that everyone's just kind of getting ripped back and forth on. Throw them in a list. Relieve your brain of it. And then when you come up on your monthly or quarterlies or whatever, then bring it up at the proper time and place, right? We've all seen those leaders that are just reactive. And that's not just in those environments where you have a lack of systems, but the lack of discipline, to stay focused on the one or two major things. And the other point I wanted to kind of make in this area was the quote from Stephen Covey that said, you have to decide what your highest priorities are and have the courage, pleasant, smilingly, unapologetically, to say no to other things. And the way you do that is by having a bigger yes burning inside. And that's basically saying the team agreeing that this is the most important thing. And that is what I call on the high performance coaching side, the power to say no, right? When you're clear about what you should be working on, when you're clear on what your schedule looks like, and you're committed to those things, it's really empowering, because when you have a blank schedule, because you just show up every day and you just lollygag through your day based on whatever's coming at you or whatever you feel like doing or whatever pops in your inbox, well, as things pop, you don't have the power to say no, because you really don't have true accountability to how you intended to spend your day or how you intended to spend this quarter on the most important things. And those things are important, because that's how you catch yourself in that trap of zigzagging all over the place, because you just don't have the power to say no.
Right. And it goes into a little bit more. And you talked about the traps, right? Your little good idea traps. We as leaders sometimes it's easy to see a shiny object, right? Like it really is easy to see a shiny object and go, man, that's so cool to add to our what our repertoire of things that we can do. But I think the important thing to realize, and this really does this in here, wildly important, is a couple things. And one is, and it mentions it in here, is saying it may be a really good idea, but it doesn't meet your goals, right? And so your goal should be to finish that goal, get to that goal before we start to take on. Now there's timing stuff of saying, hey, I got to do market impact, right? There's going to be things that do that, but then you got to break down capacity of your team, because if you add all that and your team gets unfocused, you're going to miss those initial goals, and that's not what you want. And so this really focuses on, okay, what's there, because you can always go to the idea trap. I had one of my good leaders, my last CO, actually, before I got out, used to have a board in his thing. It said big rocks, little rocks, pebbles. Mm-hmm. And that's how he would organize it, right? And see, like, what's his big stuff that he's got to do, can't miss. Maybe it was for the Admiral or for the Commodore. He had his little rocks, and then he had his pebbles of stuff. And, his pebble list got really long, and he didn't always get it. And he would make a conscious effort, probably once a quarter, I would say, to go, okay, I really need to get to some of these pebbles, because they were the pebbles pieces, or when he was able to get to them. And that's how he did it. And everybody can have something else. And there's also a quote, though, and I mentioned it before. I want to bring it up by George Carlin, the great late George Carlin. Everybody, if you don't know, he's a comedian. I'm sure everybody heard of him. But it really was impactful to this. And whether you got his political sarcasm and how he had his things and the 7 words that we definitely can't allow to say on here. But he had a quote here that I think is really important, and it really looks to me. I when I read the wildly important and went back and was really focusing on it, this was one of these things came to my mind when I remember him. It's the American view that everything has to keep climbing: productivity, profits, even comedy. No time for reflection, no time to grow up. No time to learn from your mistakes. But that goes against nature, which is cyclical. And I love that, because what it allows you to do is it allows someone to say, once I've focused on what's really important and we've reached it, now it's time to, maybe even before we move on to the next idea, hold on, let's see the impact of what we're doing here. Because maybe, and James Tyler brought this up in small business, you may not have to keep this just getting bigger and getting bigger and getting bigger, right? Like you could be fine just getting to a certain point and being really good at that one thing, right? And so I just remembered it, and as I was reading all these things, it was really interesting to me that kind of like, we forget that as leaders, to say, man, you're an HVAC, and now you guys are moving to plumbing, and now you guys are moving to lawn. Like, wait, hold on a second. Like, what are you guys really good at? Like, like if you're just mediocre, and sometimes you want to be the jack of all, because I wrote that down too. I was like, jack of all trades, master of none. Like, you get into that trap if you don't prioritize and really look at what's wildly important to you. So those are a couple extra things that I
even on these focuses, right? One tool for everyone's tool belt, just the question of what are you solving for? Just in your example, like, again, back to what your focuses should be. These pile of ideas that come through or whatever, I like to ask of them, what are we solving for? So we're an HVAC company. Hey, we should be doing plumbing. What are we solving for?
Right.
What are we solving for?
Right.
Well, clients, we have no good referral source for plumbing, or we've tried these folks and there's a lot of poor service. No one's really good, and it's making us look bad. And we got a couple guys that came from plumbers, and they know how to do it. In fact, we got to run piping. We got to know that anyway. Hey, right now you're solving for something, right? Like, just because you could doesn't mean you should. And always kind of start those things with what are we solving for? Because usually when you start to answer that question, again, it starts to compartmentalize the needle movers to the just idea pool, right? Like the needle movers, like you're solving for something. You're either getting more efficient or you're growing or whatever the case may be. But the ones that really just aren't solving for anything, they'll land where they land.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads us to number 2, though, and it's act on lead measures. Act on your lead measures, and it's about the discipline of leverage, is what it's really focusing on. And so I think when you talk about the way it talks about leverage, I thought was really interesting because it talks about it in the sense of your team's energy, time, and resources, right? And you're trying to take advantage of those 3 things, right? Because you're going to run out of time, you're going to run out of your team's energy, and you're going to run out of resources at some point. So you want to maximize the time you have to do that. Because if you think about it, right, when it talks about this discipline of leverage, what you're really talking about is saying, look, because this is the way I saw it too, and I think about it this way: you're always going to have, you may have someone who, you may have a female on your team that wonderfully gets pregnant, right? And they're the best at something, but now all of a sudden, right, they get their absolute time to go do that. You may have someone who caught COVID. You may have someone who, there's all kinds of things that you can put in to this equation of that. And
someone gets hit by the bus.
Right.
That's what everyone's, right?
Horribleness, right? But I mean, you could talk about single point of failures too. But what I'm thinking about it of saying, in the sense of saying, look, if your business is set up for success, you have a great team, you still can only use them so much, right? Because you don't want to burn them out. You want to, because if you burn out, you're gonna, the ideas, the positive energy that you have and they bring to the team, it's gonna fade, right? And you're trying to capture that and recapture it every single time, right? You want them to walk in the door and go, bam, so I'm excited to be here. What are we going to do? Maximize that, right? Because look, we're humans. The way I looked at it, I was like, dude, we're human beings. You're gonna get to a point where you're like, man, we're doing this again. Or maybe not. Maybe it's, oh my God, we're doing something different. Like, wait, hold on. So you got to be able to maximize that time when everybody's, I think of it like, all right, we give everybody, what time does coffee wear out, right? Like when the coffee wears out, your leverage is, now you got to get creative with your leverage or whatever you want to say it is. But I looked at it like that when I was leading, and they were talking about lead and lag measures here too. But I really like that fact of saying, look, we got to maximize that bubble before we hit the crescendo and then it starts to go down. How do we maximize that time is the way I looked at it.
Yeah, this goes a little bit back to what we were saying in the beginning about understanding the system, so you know what levers to pull, right? And then you can leverage, those actions. But I think the most important takeaway of discipline too is this. And probably one of the best quotes from the book on this one was, managing a company by looking at the financial data, which is lag measures, is the equivalent of driving a car by looking in the rearview mirror, right? So lead and lag indicators, what we're saying here is, you've got to focus your people on those levers, the things that move the needle for the results. If you listen to anything Lions Guide on this topic, from me at least, you'll hear me talk about, the report card. What is the report card? The report card is a lagging indicator, because once that report card delivers and you're handing it to mom and dad, there's not a damn thing you can do about it. Those grades are set. Right. Those grades are a result of the things that happened throughout that school semester, right? The things that happen throughout that school semester are your lead indicators.
Right.
Your lead indicators, right? Did I do my homework? Did I go to class? Did I get good grades on the quizzes and exams? Those are all things that are manageable here and now. Doing your homework, you have complete control over that. Showing up to class, you have complete control over that. Studying for the exams, you have complete control over that. And if you do those things, which are your leading indicators for your results, you don't even need to see the report card, because you know what it is. You aced all the exams. You did all your homework. You showed up to class every day. I don't even need to see it, Mom. That's an A in math. I know it. Right. And that's what leading and lagging indicators are. And you want to get your team focused on the leading indicators, right? You want to get your team focused on when the report card delivers, or do you want to get them focused on getting the assignments done? Because that's what makes the grade. And this is something that's a challenge, I think. When a team does not have a scorecard, this can be a challenge. because people default to the results, and you really got to ask yourself, well, how does that happen? How does, hey, we need more profits. Great. Profits are a result. They're a lagging indicator. When you closed a month, that's like the report card. What gets us the profits? Well, I don't know. What's been getting us profits so far, right? You start breaking that thing down to what makes that result. And that's going to tell you what your leading indicators are. And now you've got something tangible to get your team focused on every day. And then they don't need to see what the report card is. They know what it's going to be. It's nice to see, of course.
Well, yeah. And there's your other point, right? Like your lagging indicators also are those goals, though, that you do put out there and say, we want to get to those things, right? We want to get to those. The way I look at it for leads, to me, I'm a huge checklist. I'm a checklist manifesto book guy. I love it. I think it's just, I'm, especially when you're doing something for the first time. We talked in the beginning about setting your goals. We talked about this entire book being able to be used, whether you put things in place and systems before you even start doing stuff or you don't. At some point, what you need to be able to do for lead indicators is hey, here's a checklist. Let's build a checklist for it, because if you do these 7 things, we know we're going to get this result later, right? So you take it up. In my eyes too, I was looking at lead and lags as little bites and pieces versus big bites and pieces, right? So your little goals are being able to, let's get a checklist in there, because we know, man, we want to put through this, this point cloud every single time the right way. Well, cool. We have these 10 things we're going to make sure that we do every single time, or check for. We may not do them, but we need to check for them every single time. Versus if I do those, I already know then the client's going to get a beautiful product in the end. We don't even need to worry about it, right? Or as long as everybody else does their checklist items on their thing, right? And then it comes as a whole. And what I like about this too, and I wrote this down, there's a lot of new creative jobs out there in our world, right? Chief people officer and chief whatever officer and happiness police and whatever we have at our companies. If you're going to put those in, and even your regular jobs, right? Even your senior managers, whatever, even your brand new employee, if you try to give everybody, if you do this will act to this, these, if you give them their own leads and lags and the goals are the lags, I think what you end up doing is you're setting the standard and system like we've been talking about this whole time, right? You're setting those things so they could be successful, because if you can give them great lead indicators that help them get to where they need to be and be successful for what you hired them for, guess what? They're happy. Then they're like, I accomplished this. I did what my boss or what my team leader, or what my whoever wanted me to do. And then you're good, right? I mean, you're building this whole, we hate the word. I don't hate the word culture. Let me just for that. I don't hate culture, but you're getting this whole if then this then, right? And so it's X plus Y by Z, right? Is what you're ending up kind of.
Well, there's tangibles, right?
Yeah, like absolutely.
I think it was this book, or at least some book I read. They use the example of like a baseball game, right? Like imagine a baseball game being played and they didn't keep score, right? Like you're watching a game, but they didn't keep score. There's not a lot of fun in that. There's not a lot of fulfillment in that for the teams playing. So to your point about the necessity of it, right? This goes back to the 4 truths about employee engagement. What people want to know what a good job looks like, and a appropriately set leading indicator scorecard tells them exactly what a good job looks like. Like this is your score. This is your scoreboard. This is what you're aiming for every day. And that's again, hashtag clarity, and very fulfilling for them to know. If they're just operating and they don't know what the score is, they don't know what a good job looks like. It's tough to feel fulfilled by your job.
And I think there needs to be a caveat to this. And if you wouldn't have put it in the context of baseball, I probably wouldn't even have thought about it. I went to my first baseball game probably in a very long time, probably 2 months ago, right? There were more stats on the board about everything besides just the score than like the velocity that the ball was being thrown, the velocity of the ball being hit out. They've merged like slugging percentage plus another percentage now that you get some new percentage. And and I kept thinking to myself, like, have we overcomplicated this where it doesn't, like, now I'm watching the Little League World Series, or at least I've, you see highlights and I'm like, there's the purest form, right? There's the purest form of a kid throwing a ball. It's a run, it's a score. I think you have to be careful. What you need to be able to do too is you can't, saying what we've just said about setting these things up for people, you have to put it on to me, you have to put it on a sliding scale, right? It always has to be on some sliding scale. Do you want them to be successful? Absolutely. That's the whole point of running a business, is wanting to be successful and being, meeting mission, meeting goals, meeting whatever you have, profit margins, if that's it. But I think what we need to do too is when you have your leads and your lags, you want to make sure that it's on a sliding scale. You want to take advantage of the fact that things are going to happen and that the human element comes into it, right? So it's not just about all these things. Like, you and I do it all the time, right? And I probably do it worse than you, right? Dale will tell me, I'll let everybody on the signal. Dale will be like, the time to go is 1:30. And I'll be like, can we push 5? And I always feel bad asking you that we need to do it. But that's somewhat true of the sense of saying, with everybody else, like, you need your leads and lags can change, and you need to be able to pivot on those as a leader to say, okay, it changed because of X, Y, and Z. Got it. What's the new thing? Can we still meet? Can we can't? Because what you'll find out is you may find out a lot of stuff that you don't even know about, right? And so you need to make sure that those are there, because it kind of leads into the last one, which is keeping, or not the last one, discipline 3, which is keeping the record. So when things do change, well, why you can go back now and you can look and say, oh, okay, because it might have been better, right? It might be better. Like, I'd be very surprised to know, and I would love to if we could just pull magical information out of the air that's completely true without any, being pulled from whatever. How many businesses during COVID changed and now they're better because they were doing things before, and now all of a sudden COVID made them do it a different way, and now they're more efficient, now they're more workflows or whatever. And I know we get the stories about, oh, our business was, we were shut down or whatever, or, which is horrible. But how many of them were like, man, it opened our eyes to do this in a different way that we never thought about before, because we weren't faced with that, right? So all of our leads, we were going off the same leads and lags that we had been for years and doing great. And now all of a sudden, without even having, like, wanting the change at all, because I don't think anybody wanted COVID and what happened, but now all of a sudden it changed. But now they have a record too, right? So they have a record about it. They can go back. They have to kind of look at it, because if you don't, you're just kind of pulling stuff out of the air, right?
Well, it's same thing. Like again, they use the analogy of the car. We talked about, like, driving a car by looking in the rearview mirror. If you're only focused on the financials or only focused on the lagging indicators. But, imagine driving your car down the road with no dashboard. Right. Can't see the speed, can't see the gas, right? Like, and that's, and so you take a COVID. How do you know how COVID really impacted you? Really? If you weren't keeping score, of your performance, not just the P&L, but, like, how many widgets were you getting out? How many hours were you billing? How many calls were you taking in? Right. Like, not just the financials, but your operations, right? We're talking about execution here. Your financials are almost always going to be the lagging indicator. So right. having a scoreboard, and and you were talking about the baseball thing. I get you, and I guess what you want out of your scorecard is meaningful data, right? Simple data, sure. Right? Can you get to it easily, right? Is it simple? Is it accessible? Does it, show leading and lagging indicators?
Because Billy Bean changed it for everybody, right? With the A's and thing.
On base percentage, right?
We could make an argument now that you're seeing all these data sets within football of saying, well, here you're supposed to go for it. Here you're not. When's the 4th down? Well, you end up being up in no man's land. Right before it was 3 and out, you're done. You're punting. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Every once in a while, did you take a 4th down? Now it's like some teams, we're always going it for on 4th, right? I mean, unless you're totally pinned or something.
Ravens felt like they were going on it for fourth every freaking fourth down last season. Jeez.
Sorry, dude, we don't have. Well, listen, you had a lot of injuries last season. You had a lot of injuries. I'm going to give you guys credit. You better secure that contract is what you better do. Speaking about lead and lag indicators, you better secure that contract for your quarterback. But, so no, but I think when it talks about the scorecard, my only caution. Listen, I am 100% into. You can't just pull your feelings out of the air when you're going, especially when you're going back for a QA or you're going for reviews, you're going for a lessons learned. You really have to have good data that you're pulling from to make decisions, right? Like you have to be able to do that, especially when it's like, I'm pulling this in, but if it's HR stuff driven, you really need to know what you're talking about. Because there's been plenty of times in the companies I've worked for and looking as a CEA, the perception is one thing, but then when you kind of really look at it and then take into perspective, then it becomes something else. And you really having a good data sets to pull from and saying, this isn't really what it's good for. Then I think it's what it helps you do. It really helps you then clearly define whether you're succeeding or whether you're failing. Because I would make an argument with you, what you said. I can absolutely drive a car without a dashboard and I can stay with the quote unquote flow of traffic. Right. But
so you think,
well,
because you won't know, right? Like, how do we know? Like you're saying you could successfully do it with your experience. But the point is, because you're talking about like intuition, right? Like you can have some intuition and you're going to drive without the dashboard with your intuition and your experience.
Correct. And you can get so far. I think out of most of the stuff that we've talked about, you can actually get pretty far like that. And you could go.
Most small businesses do, right? Like,
absolutely. In fact, I think most businesses are like that, right? Yeah, especially new businesses at the start. They're just like, I've seen a guy do it. We could do it better. Let's go do it. Okay, great. No problems. And I think you can actually be pretty successful. There have been plenty of successful businesses that have done that like that. And you could get away with it actually for a long time, right? Like, if they never checked your license plate and you're on an expired license plate and you never ran a red light, you never did a speed, you never sped, nobody's ever going to check your license plate and see that you're registered or that you don't have a license. It's never going to happen. So, but chances are, and this is the same thing in business, chances are something's going to come up that's going to force you to look at something and be more detailed in the business side, right? And this is where you get the MBAs versus the other people saying, well, I can fall back on, look, I'm not arguing either way. I think you need experience and you need knowledge. I don't care where you're getting it from. You can get it from a bunch of places. You could run a small business without having ever been, to one of those schools. It's very hard to run a big business or Fortune 500 without having the educational background and experience learning over time of understanding what you need to be looking for and why it's important. And hey, give me your straw mans. And hey, this right. Like there's no arguing that part. So I think being able to keep those scorecards and by the way, it's good for yourself too, right? Like they're good checks if you think of.
Well, that's what I was going to say with your car analogy there, right? Like here, because a lot of founder owner small businesses who start a business because they want to do a job. They create themselves a job. It grows. They hire people, but there comes a point for whatever the reason that you need to start organizing things.
Right.
And with your analogy with the car, right? Sure. You may have had that business for 5-10 years and you never had a scorecard and you never had to document the processes. You just hire and tell them what to do. They do it, blah, blah. But if you had that dashboard and you looked at it and said, wow, all this time I've only been going 45 in a 65.
Right.
If only I would have known that if I pushed the pedal a little bit harder, I'd be going 60 miles an hour. And I could have been going 60 miles an hour for the last 4 years. But I didn't know. I thought we were going as fast as we could go. Sure. And that's where this stuff, again, intuition's great, but and you need it. Like you need to make those gut calls. Like, vagus nerve is real, the feeling that you have in your stomach and ties directly to your brain, blah, 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 real stuff. Yeah. But it's good to check it, right? Like, I'm sure the oil is good. When's the last time you changed it? I don't know. I'm sure it's good. It feels like it's good. I'm pretty sure it's good. Right. Wouldn't you want to just check the little thing, make sure you got oil in it. So, and then you might go, yeah, see, I told you, or crap, wow, I'm really low. So it's important to have these scorecards, love them or hate them, learn to love them. You'll go farther.
Yeah, and I think one of the other parts that it mentioned in here was it was mentioning team engagement driving results, and how it's only the right engagement that it's going to drive results, right? You go back to your leverage and really leveraging the right time. You can have somebody that's completely engaged on things that aren't your goals, right? Or they're not part of your lead indicators that you're looking forward. And then you're like, dude, this dude's clocking in, clocking out every day. I see them working. And all of a sudden you realize that they're not engaged on meaningful stuff, right? So having, like, we would like to call clarity, and you'd like to, right? Like making sure that your people are engaged on the things, because it's that clear engagement about stuff, and really the commander's intent, like we talked about, what's wildly important and all that stuff, is what really they focus on, of saying, hey, look, make sure it's just not doing work for work, right? I mean, because what's the point of even having them come in if they're working on stuff that's not drawing down? Now, we all get it.
I think a part of this great resignation and terminations and kind of a lot of this reset that's happened over the last 2 years, again, back to the necessity of COVID, right? COVID necessitated checking our operations and dealing with things. It necessitated it. But I think also it made organizations look at people, right? It was a big crunch, when 2020 was a crunch year, and cash flow became a real big problem for a lot of organizations real quick. And they started looking around going, well, what does Johnny really do? Right. What is that position really intended for? It's not managed well. In fact, it's, inefficient to today's processes or what we need. Yeah. So there's a bit of that type of scenario thanks to COVID in a way.
Yeah. And then that leads us really into the last one, and we saved it for last, because it goes that way in the book, but also
it is the last one.
It is the last one in the book, but it's also one that we've talked about 100 times, that, and extreme ownership to me, Jocko and Leif and them, but it's encouraging accountability, right? And performance tracking, and really how are you consistent performance tracking, right? And which is leading to accountability for people. And listen, I think, like everything else, we've gotten report cards since we were in kindergarten, and they've told us how we were doing and how well we were doing. I think it's encouraging for both employees and from both sides of the leadership coin, whether you are on a team or whether you run a team, right? However that pans out to you. I think we are programmed to want to know how well we did, and are we doing good? And we owe it to people to tell them, good, bad, or others, how they are, right? Clear, consistent, and transparency, right? You have to be able to give it to them kind of straight, because I think what does it talks about? It talks about the foundation and the final discipline and accountability is where the action is going to happen. And I would agree with that, right? If they keep doing the wrong thing over and over again, it leads back to kind of what we just had talked about, which was just, it's engagement, but it's not meaningful engagement. So you want to know, and you want guidance to say, I'm doing good, I'm not doing good, right? Yeah. And if you take it to this perspective too, I did this when we had technical rates in the Navy, but you could do it in colleges. And I think this is what you saw probably in the millennials a little bit, which was, I went to school for this and there were no jobs for me outside, and now I got to do something completely opposite. Well, listen, if people go and they, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be an accountant. Cool. And then, you go through accounting in college, you pay for all that, you come out, and then there's no accounting jobs. And now you've got to work at an insurance, and you're selling insurance just because you have a 4-year degree. That's not a purposeful thing, right? And you need to know. So I think when we set our society up to be like this, what we're setting up for then is also to be able to give feedback to them and give them what essentially accountability for their actions to do the job that they want to do, right?
Yeah. Another area, especially, again, developing leaders, again, especially business owners that are taking on a leadership role maybe they hadn't had in the past. And this cadence of accountability, some leaders like to give a directive and walk away.
Right.
And what I feel this discipline is saying is that, having a cadence of accountability, right? So having a routine of following up on these most important items, right? Reviewing the scorecard, making sure everyone's still on board with the commitments. These things, as opposed to, again, this reactionary leadership where you give someone something to do and you just turn your back and don't think about it anymore. And then 2 weeks later, it comes to mind. You go, yeah, man. Hey, Johnny, how'd it go on that thing I gave you 2 weeks ago? And the Johnny's like, yeah, man. And, I never got to that. Now you just lost 2 weeks.
Right.
So as a leader, this discipline just generally, just having a cadence of accountability. And let me tell you something. Welcome to leading people. I feel you need to not only keep track of, like, I've got my own to-dos, right? I got the things I'm accountable for, things I need to get done or been asked of me. When I delegate a specific task, I will throw it on my to-do and kind of put like a prefix on it going, Keith, this. Just as a reminder, and then I'll set the due date for it for like a week or whatever to go follow up on it. Like if it was something ad hoc. Otherwise, we do that in the meetings, right? Like we've got objectives for a week and I don't, and sometimes we'll say, hey, yeah, well, let's just touch base on Friday and make sure this is kind of going the way we expected. So there's no surprises next week when we come to the meeting. Because as of right now, we're walking away from this meeting and these are the 6 things we're going to get done, between the handful of us. But I preferably want to kind of have, like, back to the report card analogy, I want to have that interim report card to kind of see, hey, are we on track or not?
Sure.
Because I just hate losing time. I know time we're not getting back. And we don't want to have surprises, when we, at our, right. What we talked about earlier, X to Y by when.
Z.
So if we're agreeing in a meeting that we're going from X to Y by this time next week, if it's a needle mover, I kind of want to know we're on track for that halfway through.
Sure. That's part of your control.
Well, if you're looking farther than just a week at a time, you need to know, right?
Sure. Dude, there's check-ins, first drafts, call them whatever you want when you're doing something. And listen, if you're working on things that are as important, this all depends too, right? I mean, it's a scalable thing of what you're talking about. If you're talking about a $500 million merger, you may get updates daily on stuff, right? Sure. You may get that where it's like this way. I would make an argument that I worked for a company that even as a junior project manager, if I owned a project every Monday, I was talking about it. And maybe only 3 sentences. Sure. But it may have been the way that you handle this though as a leader. This is important. I think really important for what you're saying, because I think there could be people that misconstrued of what you're doing as micromanaging. And I don't believe, first of all, that's not, I know what you do. But I think it's also important for people to understand that it's not just about, you can get someone who's like, stay out of my shit. I got it. That's not the point of what people are trying to do, right? From an overall standpoint up above, your job, and I can tell you from a project manager, from a certified person who is it, there's a point of just saying, I need to move my needle on my board forward, right? I have a sliding board that's saying I'm in control of these things, or I may not be doing the work. There may be a technical writer. I need to know that project is moving along at the pace it needs to be, because where can I help, right? Because if you take that attitude, you lose the micromanagement thing of saying, can I help? Do you need any help with it? No, I got it. I'm all good. And we needed to do that. It's not always, and it can get misconstrued. I absolutely understand that it can be looked upon like micromanagement, but as you do it, I mean, it might be, hey, take out the trash every week. Well, you may not need to check on that. Maybe that check may be, as I'm going to my car, I see it's done. Very different than, hey man, did you guys get very different of how you do that.
I think I find myself doing it with trickle effect items, right? Sure. Like, a lot of things we're doing right now with the rebrand and the new courses and offerings and things. We're in the middle of a launch, And, we're on a timeline, and some things are dependence, right? We need this done because it's going to go into all of our course material, as a whatever. And we want to start that next week, right? So it's important to know that is on track. And in our traction module, as an example, you have what's called quarterly rocks, which are your most important items that you're going to get accomplished in a quarter. These are your kind of quarterly projects.
Big rocks, little rocks.
And and so in traction, you'll learn that the rocks are assigned. At the beginning of the quarter, you do offsite, you decide what these most important items are amongst the team, get them assigned out, take them on as projects. And on your weekly meetings, you don't really talk about them. The reporting is simply each week you run down the rocks and the people go on track, off track.
Yep.
That's it. Now, if someone says it's off track, well, maybe we'll have a talk about it, because now there's an issue to talk about. But if it's on track, there's not really anything to talk about.
Right.
So it's a way to just make sure that understanding that there's a lot of moving parts that are kind of in tandem that may have some dependencies. And if one part's falling behind, it's important maybe for the whole to know. So definitely. Yeah. And I appreciate you saying it's bringing clarity to it's not micromanaging. It's leading.
Yeah.
Proactively, frankly.
We used to say trust but verify, right, all the time. And that got a bad connotation, because then people who were micromanaging were saying the same thing. And then you're like, wait a second. But the truth is, and this leads us into the last part of the book, we've talked about the 4 disciplines, but it does give you like an example of like a WIG session, right? And being able to, and what you're talking about is exactly it, right? It's clear, it's concise. It's making sure that it's happening every single time, right? Every single time at the same week, the same time. And people are bringing these very simple messages of whether they're executing either on track or off track. Yeah. And again, it may not be, actually it could be on track, off track, but it's probably more like, yep, nailed that piece of the puzzle today. We moved the needle 15 things. I may need you for blah, 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 because you're the CEO and you've got some weight behind you. I'll give you a call if I need you this week, blah, blah, blah. Just as a heads up. And it's the next project, go. Right. And that's what we did. I try the places I go to implement that's simple. You get people who want to talk deeper into things. You get people who want to go off track with stuff and lead down. It's really easy to lead down rabbit holes, honestly, the more you do speak, but it's good just to be able to say we're good, because then it leaves other people out of what you do. And you don't fall into the micromanagement mentality. You just fall into the either, we're good to go. I trust my people, right? Which is what we've talked about before.
Yeah, for sure. But I think as far as the book, the 4 disciplines of execution: focus on what's wildly important. Discipline 1, discipline 2, act on the lead measures. Those are your leverage. Discipline 3, keep a compelling scorecard. And I like the use of compelling too, right? It talks about engagement, the fulfillment, the feeling of achievement, compelling scorecard. And then discipline 4, create a cadence of accountability. Yep. So other than that, it's a great book. I think it gives a lot more than just the philosophical, that high level stuff. All we've talked about today is really part 1. Sections 2 and 3 dive into actually implementing these ideas, which again, like I think you were saying this earlier, talking about adopting a framework. It gives you something, like we talked about, it gives you something to start with, and then review, reflect, adjust, keep going. So, I like these books when they kind of give you the starting point, so that you can kind of see the results and make the decisions as far as
I look at this book, and I think I don't know if it's one of your like in Lion's Guide. You guys are going to see very soon that Dale and I are both going to do little episodes for ourselves about our 5 favorite books and why is coming out. Is this one of your top 5 or no? I'm not putting you on the spot, and I don't think McChesney's going to look this up, but
well, look, it's
not one of mine.
Yeah. And so my pillars of personal freedom for a business owner. So when we talk personal development, professional development, leadership development, this would definitely go in my professional development pillar.
Is it a top 5 book
for a business owner? If we're talking about professional,
that's not what I'm talking. I'm talking overall. Your top 5 books
for a business owner.
Yes.
If I have to say yes, I would say
you don't have to say anything.
I need 10. I need 5 for
you get 5. You don't know. See, this is the point, people. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about wildly important. Your top 5
wildly
important.
On the record, books. Like I'm running through my roll.
So here's my point. So let me. I'm gonna let you big off the hook.
It'll make all 5.
Okay, it won't make my 5, and here's the reasons why. I think what we talked about before with it, and this is the wrap up portion of it, of why it's not. It's in a leadership book it's in a business book for me about leadership, about a certain skill set that you want to master as you move through. I think it's a secondary skill set to master about execution for a few reasons. One, I think you need to learn about your team first and how you guys do and your basics of your business. And I'm not saying this doesn't do that. I'm not saying it doesn't even focus that, but I think there's an exploration in this learning period, this discovery period that a lot of business owners have. And sometimes you've gone through it already. So it may be a first book that you go and get after you hear this, right? But to me, it's and again, there may be people that go, I'm a data person guy versus I'm a people person guy. And I think you have to be the best of both worlds to be a really good business leader. To me, when I look at it, I look at it as like, if you're at the point with your business, you could absolutely read it in Dale's, like to Dale's point, you could actually read your top 5 and you would absolutely learn something from it. Implementing it, I think it's got to be in baby steps if you're just starting out, because you're just getting used to the car, what it can do, right? How fast you can go, right? All that kind of stuff. Now you've done that. Now you say, okay.
Well, you don't know what problems to solve for at that stage, right?
But a lot of it is also, right, it's discovery. It's like we don't even know what we don't know, right? And that was one of the things when I made Master Chief and I made Command Master Chief. It was, I knew one of the final questions I was going to ask when I took over from another Master Chief was going to be, hey, tell me something that I don't know and don't even know to ask you about, right? So I knew that was a question for myself. The other ones were easy. What's the CO like? What's the people like? What's the climate like? What's the squadron like? Blah, 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 blah. The last one was always that. I think this is that now that I know and I have a good sense of who we are, now let me put the execution to it and see what we can get out of it, right? So now it's the painting the car or souping it up and putting in the turbo power and all that kind of stuff. That's where I think this comes in. And it could happen right away. You could say, hey, I just started my business 6 months later. I have a good set. Now we're going to start to go and use the 4 disciplines and really start to finite all of our stuff. I think that's a good thing because I think there's learning lessons in it. And so that's my opinion again. And I'm everybody's different, but overall, great book, great kind of focus on what you wanted to do. Taking the first one, just the wildly important stuff and making sure that is, if you take none other than it from the beginning, you could definitely take that one from the beginning and look at it all. But overall, great book. Like I said, we didn't streamcast this one. Just going to be posting on a couple places for us this week, and actually at the end of the month, actually for this when we do doing a little early. But listen, great book this month. Great book overall for August. Looking forward to seeing what we have for you September. That'll come out in a couple weeks when we do it. But otherwise, great job. Thanks on Lions Guide today. We appreciate it. Look forward to next month when this comes out in a couple weeks. Actually, will be Everyday Leadership. We'll be hitting the streets, which we'll be excited to see you guys sign up for that. Other than that, that's all we got. And thanks for stopping by today. We appreciate it. And as always, flip out. Have a great week.